I'd like to welcome you all. My name is Rebecca Palmer. I'm the director of the Winterthur Library. And I just want to thank you for joining us for day two, the day two event in our Fresh Perspectives Symposium series, the second of four conversations that will take place throughout 2025, aimed at highlighting the voices of the next generation of rare book, manuscript, and special collections professionals, scholars, and enthusiasts. Our thanks again to the Bibliographical Society of America for their support of this program. Before I introduce our moderator for today's conversation, I'd just like to start by acknowledging that Winterthur stands on the indigenous territory, excuse me, of Lenapehoking, the traditional homeland of the Lenape. As we honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations and this land, we also commit to taking meaningful action to strengthen our relationships with the Lenape community and to assist in uplifting and upholding their sovereignty and the right to self-determination. And now it brings me great pleasure to introduce today's moderator, my colleague, Ali Alvis, who joined Winterthur Library in 2023 in the inaugural role of Curator of Special Collections. You may also know Ali from their popular social media presence, Book Historia, where they share the colorful, wonderful, and sometimes downright bizarre world of rare books and special collections with audiences from around the globe. Ali will go ahead and introduce our panelists for today's conversation. And with that, take it away.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you to all of you in the audience for attending for this very exciting day two. Just a quick note on the structure. This will be a sort of moderated conversation for the first hour, and then we will open it up to audience questions. That also includes speakers to ask each other questions. But with that, I will begin to introduce our speakers in alphabetical order. So first we have Finch Collins, who is the Assistant Curator of Rare Books at the Linda Hall Library, Patrick Matherly, who is an aspiring bookseller, and Auroura Morgan, who is a tattoo artist and the winner of the 2023 Honey and Wax Book Collecting Prize. So, Finch, would you like to give us a little background on how you got to where you are?
Absolutely. I wasn't sure if you were going first or last names, so I see that I'm first. It's good to be here today. As Ali said, my name is Finch Collins. I'm the Assistant Curator of Rare Books at Linda Hall Library in Kansas City, Missouri. I got to my current position following graduate school, pretty traditional path, graduate degree in history and library science at Indiana University Bloomington. And I got my start in rare books at Brown University, where I was a Hay undergraduate research fellow working with Heather Cole, who I see is joining us here today. As part of my responsibilities as assistant curator of rare books at Linda Hall Library, I steward the history of science collection, which includes making acquisitions, collecting in perhaps the most straightforward sense, but also includes ongoing stewardship of an existing collection. So I'm really excited to be joining the conversation today.
All right, Patrick.
Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here with you all. My name is Patrick Matherly. I studied computer science originally in undergrad and started working in libraries on the technology side, but in the past year began working in special collections at the Rubenstein at Duke University. And then last fall, I participated in the ABAA Discovery Program, which was a great way to get an overview of the book trade. And now I'm currently exploring opportunities in the rare books trade.
All right, and Auroura.
Hi, I'm Auroura. I am a tattoo artist. I'm located near Nashville, Tennessee. I'm currently working at a tattoo shop a little further out of the city in Dixon, Tennessee. I got to where I am currently in my field by, I originally started where I am now. I went and opened my own business in downtown Nashville. That was a bit much for me, so I'm dialing back and working at someone else's studio again. And as far as books go, I didn't really, I don't know, my exposure was pretty much just going to the library as a little kid. I didn't come from like a super literate or educated family, but like I really picked that up and got into collecting like hardcore probably in my early 20s once I got my own place. There are a couple really awesome bookstores close to me. So that was more so how I really started getting into this and having like limited space for books. So I wanted all the books that you could not buy, like for Kindle or like digital format. And yeah, that's pretty much how I got to where I am now.
And that is a great segue to our first question, which is what drew you to collecting in the first place, whether that's something you do in your personal life or in a professional capacity?
Starting with me?
Sure. Yeah.
Oh,
It's free form, so anybody can hop in whenever they want.
so I started collecting reference books once I started my tattoo artist apprenticeship in my early 20s. So like most tattoo shops I've been to, there's like a random bookshelf in the back of the shop that the clients would never see. And on those shelves usually exist some very incredible books, whether it's like old sketchbooks from the artists that work at the shop, people who have passed through and left artwork behind, or people who have like self-published their books like privately, like so like you come across some really unique books, some that are like really incredible art for tattooing, and you know, like whether they're books about topography or like I even have some about tattoo anthropology and like the history of tattooing. So I really started getting into reference collecting once I found those in the studio. Um, and then like there are several really awesome used bookstores in town, and I got the collecting bug there. Like it got a lot really quick.
Aurora, I love that you mentioned the availability of physical bookstores. That certainly was something that got me into collecting personally and professionally. I've begun, now that I'm no longer a grad student, doing a little collecting myself of, unfortunately, my research interests are in the early modern period, which forecloses a lot of collecting possibilities on price point. But my awareness of all the books that I can't buy in digital form is very, very sharp given the books that I work with on a day-to-day basis, which is really dangerous when I have access to a good used bookstore. As for me, though, on what drew me to collecting, I mentioned the undergraduate research fellowship I took part in. I think that was a really big draw for me into library work and library school. And in particular, I saw for the first time kind of the material of history and the way that collecting is a very large part of how history becomes history, how the present is made into history, and how history is shaped. And I found a real passion for collecting as a way to intercede in that process. You know, I don't necessarily need to be a historian writing books, but can instead sort of accumulate the material for people to use.
Yeah, similarly to both of you all, I think I started first collecting because of my interest in everyday objects and kind of coming from it from a cultural anthropological standpoint, thinking about like what everyday objects say about culture or economic context. Um, so some of the things that kind of guide my collecting are food and drink and cookery and sort of like homemaking in general. And I like to collect and draw inspiration from those things in my day-to-day life. So um, like everyday things and or kind of mundane things like cooking or dressing or home interior design. So I often find myself looking for things that inspire what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. And then I'll just touch on the bookselling side. I became interested in bookselling while I was working in special collections at Duke. And I sort of just wanted to know how collections got into libraries and how curators found new materials. And yeah, I mentioned it before, but I participated in the ABAA Discovery Program and met a lot of people in that industry or in that field, the curators, the booksellers, and the private collectors, and learned a ton about that. So, yeah.
I think that there's an interesting commonality between all three of you and sort of how you think about collecting and how you sort of engage in collecting. And something that sort of sprung up to me is that each of you have sort of very defined areas of where you're collecting and what you're collecting and for who and how. But I guess how do you sort of conceptualize the boundaries of your collecting? Like, how do you know this is a book that I want for my collection and this is not? I know for those of us working in institutional settings, there are things like collections development policies, so you can't just go out and buy whatever you want. But even within that, there's some wiggle room. So I'm just interested in sort of hearing how you all find those boundaries.
Yeah. Something I was thinking of in preparation for this is that I wanted to work in, and I feel like this is a good opportunity, is I've noticed in my collecting for Linda Hall, there is so much that I could possibly acquire. And really, if I'm asked to justify why I made one decision over another, it really comes down to vibes pretty often. So a little more on Linda Hall Library is a library of science, engineering, and technology, and I work in the history of science collection, which is sort of a sub-collection within the library. It's classic special collections structure. And historically, the collection was built on around the greats of the history of science, the big names, the Western European men who worked in royal academies and who made scientific discoveries. And in the last, I think my Jason Dean, my supervisor, and my predecessor, Jamie Cumby, who's now at the Grolier, really made a lot of, and I've joined in their effort to diversify the collection and to expand not just the voices represented there, but what science entails. And this broadening, though, means that figuring out what is inside and outside of the bounds of the collection can be a bit difficult. Often what ends up being a deciding factor is how well a book will exhibit and how well a book could be used in a classroom context. It can be difficult to justify spending thousands and thousands of dollars on a first edition of an important scientific text, yes, but one that will be very opaque to the public and to students. So a broad answer, but I hope that touches on it.
For my collecting criteria, I have about 5 or 6 rules I kind of like set for myself, and like I probably have about 3 or 4 categories that I collect in specifically, but they all overlap in my mind. So like I'm collecting anything that would be like, tattoo and graphic design reference, whether it be history or like art. Typically, I like books that have either really high quality photographs or illustrations when it comes to like the natural history and science section of my collection that's like really focused on like vintage, like lithograph and etching, like or other print techniques that translate really well to tattooing. Like Audubon works or Ernst Haeckel or pretty much anything you would see in a Peterson field guide, like that style of illustration. So I'm collecting books that have as many illustrations like cover to cover as possible. And I like for them to be like either unique print styles, like high quality. If the older they are, the better, because like if they've held up that long in a book and they look solid as a print, they make phenomenal tattoos. So you know, that's kind of one of my main things I look for. If I can get, I always go for like hardcover bindings if I can. If I can get a special edition binding or a rare binding that I haven't seen before, I kind of always opt for those first. Um, I do like the first printings of things, but I will like edition doesn't necessarily matter. Depending on like the information it contains, like I'll have multiple editions of the same book just to see how it's changed throughout time, or like the style of the images they put in it. And then like for my like philosophy and psychology collection, I definitely go for purely like hardcover. I want like first editions with those. I'm very, very picky about that collection. So like it's a little all over the place, but they kind of it's about the same criteria across the board. Like I'll make an exception if a book, like on the illustration for like pictures, if the book has like the sheer amount of information in it. Like I found a book the other day with like over 5,000 different photos of plants in it, but it was hardcover and like had really high quality images of the plants. So I like made an exception for it because it wasn't illustrated. So I'm pretty rigid like with all of the criteria I run my books through. But I'll make exceptions every now and again if I really like the contents.
Yeah, so for me, in the beginning, my collecting was sort of fully based off of my interests in these specific niches, like, for example, winemaking in the South. And luckily, there are curators and special collections that focus on these topics and pretty much any topic you can think of. But now that I've started meeting and building relationships with librarians and curators, I definitely find myself keeping their interests in mind when I'm acquiring books. So when I'm shopping or come across something, it's now there's sort of a divide between, purely my interests and also keeping the curators that I've built relationships with interests in mind.
Yeah, that can be kind of a slim tightrope to walk, especially like when you're buying stuff for yourself and when you're buying stuff for business and slash professional slash whatever. Yeah, those lines can be a little blurry, but it can also inform both of those collections can inform each other and intersect in interesting ways. And I think that, building a personal collection and building a professional collection, you obviously have different goals for those sorts of collections. So could you tell me a little bit about what your goals are for your collections, either the ones you are currently building or the ones you hope to build? Yeah. And I guess kind of tied into that, what you hope to use them for as well.
So majority of my collection is actually like reference influence for my style as well as subject material. Tattoo artists repeatedly get asked for like the same image from Google over and over again. So I use it as a source of inspiration for my work, but also having all of that like historical artwork in different styles that can be executed as tattoos and like translates really well is very helpful to adding like new takes on art into what I do. because there's that like, tattoo artists copying each other amongst themselves. But, if everyone's, referencing the same Google images, how much is that really helping the creative pool? So, I like finding reference images from areas that people aren't going to have referenced those often to influence what I'm doing with my work. That way I can, contribute more to that creative pool of, because artists need other artists to stay creative and keep creating new things. So I do want to grow my library to be a really phenomenal reference for tattooing, like so that I never run out of ideas or subject material to pull from, because the natural world's a really, really wonderful place for inspiration. But at the same time, I also want to have like books on like the history of tattooing and stuff like that, to like teach other artists, more about our trade, because it's really important to know, you know, where what we're doing came from throughout history. I, amongst my artist friends, I get referred to as the history nerd of all of us. So if anyone has questions about the history of tattooing, whether it's like people at the shop or people that are passing through, I will often have people refer to me to teach them parts of tattoo history, which is really fun. But they'll also ask to look at my reference collection, just because I do have quite a large one. I keep a very small one at work, but the bulk of my collection's at home. So I really want to like digitize my collection someday. That way I can share it with more people, because I know that they make great references for tattoo artists, but I want to make more stuff like that accessible to other artists as well.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that in terms of inspiration. I'm definitely not an artist, but I try to be intentional about daily things, like interior design or cooking meals for friends. And I oftentimes pool on materials that I've collected to get inspiration for those types of things. And I guess in terms of book selling, my goals are on the business side to, of course, develop like a sustainable business, but also keep fostering these great relationships that I've started making with people that work at libraries and other booksellers. And also, um, part of the work is cataloging and doing research. So I would love to become more of an expert on my niches. So continuing just to learn about the history of the things that I'm acquiring.
I also consider research to be a main goal of mine. I mean, there's always areas of the collection I'm learning more about at Lindell Hall. I'd mentioned earlier expanding beyond a sort of the great men of science, the great white European men of science approach. That's certainly a major goal of mine for stewarding the Lindell Hall collection. And with sort of institutional versus personal collection, it's a slightly different tenor where I see my role not as building the collection forever and ever. It's not going to come with me, but rather sort of stewarding it and caring for it until I pass it off to the next person. One area that we've expanded in over the last, say, 7 or 8 years that really addresses how I hope people can use the collection is that we've begun to collect fine press books and artist books when they relate to the histories of science, technology, and engineering. And those are some of the most exciting books I get to work with and are often, I did a class visit a couple months ago with undergraduate students from the Kansas City Art Institute, where I paired more traditional collection items, a copy of Philosophical Transactions with a color chart in it, with a modern artist book reflecting on color charts and the role of color and perception. And that those are really exciting visits and really exciting ways to activate the collection. So it's not just an old scientific journal, but people can really see themselves and see them in it. And that's how I hope to use the collection.
I love that. That makes me very happy. It's always fun to have like these hyper visual things. They're always such winners when you show people something pretty.
Yeah.
Um,
Sometimes
uh,
they can be too much of a winner. It's a problem. I'm
yeah,
like, here's the artist book that is supplementing these other very important things. And people are like, nope, artist book. I'm like, all right, well, they learned something. They took something away from their visit today. And that's all I can hope for.
exactly. It was valuable in some form or fashion. I think all three of you have also spoken a little bit about folks or programs or initiatives that have sort of guided you on your path to doing what you're doing. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about something or someone who had an impact on how you collect or how you think about collecting.
For me, like my big influence was actually there's this man that owns the rare bookstore in town here. I don't think he's like an ABA rare bookseller, but he has really good stuff at his bookstore. And he's a bit on the older side. So my first trip in there, like I was telling him what kind of books I was looking for. And like he sat me down, like I had a coffee in my hand, we sat there and talked, and like he had to show me every single book he thought I'd be interested in and like tell me all about it. And just hearing how much he knew about all these books, and there's probably like 20,000 books in his little bookstore, like floor to ceiling, wall to wall, like it's just cram packed with books in there. And he seemed to know something about every single book that he had in there. Um, and I like, I absolutely loved that. And that really inspired me. Just because I would take these books to like work for reference, and I would show them to people, like other artists I work with or clients. And people would also be like fascinated by like what I was telling them I had learned from like flipping through the books myself. And he just made me more aware of things I could look for um, when buying books as far as quality and everything goes. So I'll always appreciate that.
I've already mentioned Heather Cole, who I think was instrumental. Hello again, Heather. At IU, I had the great pleasure of working with Joel Silver, who taught me a lot in his quiet way, modeled a lot of how to think about collecting for an institution. And as a sort of foil, perhaps, to Joel's approach, I worked with Rebecca Bauman at IU and got to see a much broader picture of special collections beyond just, I say just, early modern is really where my heart is, but beyond sort of the early modern greats, and instead collecting romance, collecting pulp, and collecting popular culture. And so I think my view on how I collect personally and for an institution was really informed by both of them and by everyone I've had the pleasure of working with, truly.
So in undergrad, I took some cultural anthropology classes, and the professor there really pushed us to use primary sources. And I think that was the first time I was introduced into special collections and spent time in reading rooms actually handling primary sources. And that was really inspirational to me. And then working in libraries, even just in circulation, I interacted with other librarians who I was inspired by because they were such experts in their field, um, and just very willing to share information. And I felt like they were interested in my success. From there, the program I participated in last fall with the ABAA was called the Discovery Program. And that was a great opportunity I came in almost knowing nothing about the rare books trade, but left with like so much information about how all the different types of booksellers and all the different positions you can be in the trade. So I left with lots of possibilities floating around in my head.
I mentioned this yesterday, so apologies for those who were here yesterday, but I love that this is coming through today as well, that collecting isn't necessarily just assembling collections of physical stuff. It's this sense of collecting experiences as well, and bringing all that together into, an emotional as well as a physical collection. And despite the fact that books are just things, they don't have emotions, that they have these like really beautiful experiences and memories tied to them in many cases. And yeah, I think that is something that I really enjoy about collecting and being a collector. But I guess looking forward now a little bit, I mean, it goes without saying at this point, but we're living in a very interesting time for many, many, many different reasons. What issues do you see as being the most pressing in terms of the future of collecting? Not necessarily just your collecting, but collecting more broadly.
I'm not sure I've been in the field long enough to make a sweeping proclamation, but at least this time I see, I mean, the ascendant fascism in the US and in Europe is very much a threat to collecting in the model I collect in, which is in the service of a more just and equitable future. I've personally been thinking a lot about the ethics of making collection purchases for a library in Missouri and in the US. Say there's a book on the market, a rare, something that we buy with some frequency is rare, like astronomical pamphlets where it's 16 pages and it's a record of an eclipse, just hypothetical. And there'll be two known holding libraries, both of which are in Europe. And it's like, oh, only copy in the US. I'm like, okay, so we could do this, but and we probably will, but will it be accessible to scholars who need it? Will they be able to very practically get a visa to come to the United States to view it? Or is this something that should go to their home country, that should go to a country of origin? So I see the big picture politics as being a very real threat to the future of collecting. But I also see on the flip side of that, a real opportunity to make decisions in support of ethical futures for collecting, and I see collecting as one way kind of through it, as it were. So that's my lighthearted two cents.
So I absolutely agree with you, Finch, on the rising worries of fascism in the world being an issue with collecting, because I absolutely collect books that would have been burned. Like a lot of my favorite books are absolutely banned books. So I have no doubt that like if times got really tough, like I have a collection that would have absolutely been burned in the Nazi book burning. Like some of my books are actually books that made it from that point in history, like very narrowly, and I'm very lucky to have copies of them. So I do worry about scarcity of books becoming more of a problem. Whether it's like people getting more interested in rare books, so it becomes more difficult to find them, or whether it's for, reasons of like, literature rights being stripped away from us, as people, and having access to that. So those are my biggest boundaries I see, besides like the rising inflation of everything as well, and not being able to afford books for safekeeping.
Yeah, I agree with both of you all. And also think about issues on institutions with more funding or more buying power being able to kind of cherry pick things away from. I'm thinking about how materials might belong to different countries or smaller institutions, and how larger institutions with more buying power um, may have more power in that sense. And then another thing that I interact daily is I work with a lot of librarians, and libraries are understaffed and librarians are overworked. And with more public funding being cut, I've been hearing that like librarian positions aren't being backfilled anymore. And so it just feels like staff reduction is getting low, it's getting more intense. And I think that is also a huge issue in the future of collecting.
Yeah, all of those are very well taken points. One of the speakers yesterday worked in, or she works in sort of preventative conservation, and she also voiced concerns about climate change and how that is affecting how we store books, and how we keep the collections for future generations. Finch, I know you spoke a little bit about this idea that we have our collections for the moment, but we're going to be passing them on eventually. And I think for those of us with private collections too, even though we own those now, they are ours. What I guess the question is, we talked a little bit about what you hope the future of your collection will be, but what do you think? I mean, it's a little grim, but it's also kind of nice to think about what will happen to the collection after the collector has gone. Who do you think will use it? Do you hope that it will stay together, or that it'll be split up among your colleagues and friends? Or yeah, just interested in a little bit of reflection on your hopes for who gets to play with your stuff when you're done with it.
Well, my greatest hope for my collection would be like to digitize it so that it's already out there and accessible for everyone. But as far as like what happens to the physical collection, I really would hope that like some sort of like, whether it's a literary institute or like a tattoo museum type thing, like actually like taking that on as part of their collections. Because I do feel like a good reference collection is really important in the history of tattooing, especially with where we are right now with most people using digital references. And that's one of those things I care very much about, like preserving and keeping alive. The point that I actually like encourage everyone around me to like buy books for their reference collection, and it's fascinating to see what they come up with.
My hope is that the institutional collections will continue to exist so long as my institution exists. I mean, Linda Hall has in its history acquired the collections of several other organizations that were deaccessioning theirs, most notably the Engineering Society's Library of New York, which was acquired. I'll date myself a little bit here. It was acquired before I was born, and I'm still cataloging some of those books. Speaking of understaffing. But what I can say is one of the great joys of my work is when I either consult a book that was cataloged a long time ago and so is a more minimal record, or when I have a new acquisition and I open it up and find it's chock full of personal and institutional book plates and other, shelf marks and signs that it's been in collections past. Those will certainly send me down multi-hour, multi-day rabbit holes, and are really, really excellent stories to share. So, well, part of me is like, no, the collection that I've assembled must stay together forever. I really hope that in the future, someone else says, "Oh, look, this book plate is traces it back to Linda Hall. That's so cool." I could see that being a positive future too.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you all in the idea that I would like the personal collections to be more accessible once I'm gone and easily findable for researchers or artists that are looking for inspiration in that area. And yeah, I've lost my train of thought, but yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, I love that idea. One of the speakers yesterday mentioned how he frequently gives his books away to people who find them interesting, not some of his more valuable sort of core collection books, but also that he's looking forward to, not collecting anymore, like saying that's enough. I've done what I wanted to do. Now it's time to send this off to an institution or back into the market or whatever. And I know that it can be kind of weird to think about that sort of thing. Like, I don't think that I will ever stop collecting. I think that somebody's going to get stuck with my stuff, and that's unfortunate for them, but I had a fun time assembling it. Um, and same with institutionally. Like, I hope Winterthur is still around for many, many, many moons. But yeah, it's funny when you do come across those old marks of provenance that sort of, as I mentioned before, speak to the collection of experiences that this material can embody. Finch, were you going to say something?
No. My microphone was just misbehaving, as technology is wont to do.
Indeed. I think I'm going to single Auroura out for this question. What is your favorite tattoo that you've done that is based on something from your collection? Whether it's like one with a great story or you just had a lot of fun doing it, or yeah.
Favorite from my collection. It's hard to say exactly because all of my designs are referenced from my collection in a way, but very few of them are straight copies. And even then, I still have to change them like to a certain degree or percent. Like in some instances, the like percentage I have to change them. I wouldn't be violating copyright law. So I don't know, a lot more of my favorite ones tend to be like any like pinup figures I've done, like kind of based on like Elgren's works or Vargas's works. I really like doing any version of the human figure like that and putting my own spin on it. But I have some really cool moths that I've done as well, and those are also some of my favorites. But like top tier favorite would be like a version of the night blooming cereus I did, which is the bloom of a tropical cactus, like native to like Central and South America. And the first time I saw it, I was like, this is such a gorgeous flower. Why is it not more common in tattooing? So it has become a flower I commonly get asked for in tattooing because I saw it in a book and I made it more common for me to do as a piece of art.
I love that one.
Mhm.
It's so pretty. Yeah, had you seen Thornton's Temple of Flora? Like that's the one that I always think of when I
You
think
beat
of
me to it.
like,
You beat me to
yeah,
it.
uh-huh.
I'll
I
get the
don't
image
believe
up.
I know that one.
It's fantastic. If you just Google Thornton's Temple of Flora, I think there have been modern reprints. And it's freaking fabulous, especially if you get to see it in person. It's massive. But yeah, if you're looking for botanical inspiration, that's a good one.
Ooh.
So I am going to, I think, single out Patrick next. Sort of a broad question. But we've talked a lot about how as someone who is getting into bookselling, that you're sort of establishing what you have based on your interests and what the interests of your customers are. But what what is the vibe of your ideal bookshop? Like if you were to open up Patrick's Books tomorrow and you had a gazillion dollars and you could do whatever you want, what would that look like? How would you showcase the collection?
That's a great question. I'm kind of split because some of my favorite bookstores are like the ancient ones that are dusty and piled from floor to ceiling with no real sense of organization outside of the storekeeper knowing where everything is. But I also love organization and tidiness. Um, so yeah, I think I would have to go with the kind of more of the cluttered look, and kind of like a vast collection on um, many different topics with a focus on food and drink and kind of all things that have to do with life at home. And um, obviously, home is a shelter for, first and foremost, but it's also a place for gathering, inspiration, art, cooking. So I think that would kind of be the focus of my bookshop and what it would look like.
I love that answer. That I would go there a lot. um, and I think Finch's turn, um, sort of thinking about place and location. I'm from Kansas, and you did your library school in Indiana, and now you're in Missouri. I think a lot of folks think of collections and collecting, and this kind of applies to Aurora's situation as well, as like, oh yeah, that's something you do in New York, or oh yeah, that's something you do in LA. So I was just wondering if you could speak to your experiences as a Midwestern manuscripts and rare books person.
Sure. I'll caveat that I'm not from Kansas. I'm actually from the coasts from outside DC. And but yeah, I mean, there's such a you're Ali is you're describing a um, phenomenon I've certainly observed where, especially people that the market is certainly concentrated, especially New York, London. It's concentrated on the coasts, but that is a concentration, not a presence and an absence. And there are so many people involved with collecting and with collections I mean, in Kansas City alone, I can think of a number of institutions and a number of people that collect. Kansas City, Missouri is the home of Hallmark. And so I'm fortunate to know many people who have worked for Hallmark and thus have collections that are sort of artistically calligraphy or print making. Um, so I think that, neglect the Midwest and neglect the middle of the country at your own peril.
I
in a
love
bit. I
that.
mean, we're certainly not New York, but we've got a lot going on. And speaking of a lot going on, I'm actually going to drop in the chat a link to the Linda Hall copy of Thornton's Temple of Flora and the Night Blooming Ceres page in particular.
Oh, thank
So,
you.
yes, of course.
I saw you typing away. I was hoping that was what you were doing.
I wasn't very subtle.
Oh, no. I do that all the time. I think a good question to sort of wrap up the this sort of structure on before we get to audience questions is what is something about your collecting that has brought you joy recently?
I can go first. So I guess I'll start in general. In terms of the book trade, and I mentioned this in the last question, I like things to be organized and tidy. So when I'm able to take something that catches my eye at like a yard sale or an estate sale, and then place it next to like objects, in a library somewhere, that's a deeply satisfying thing that brings me joy. Um, on a more personal note, though, a couple months ago, I acquired this small collection of pamphlets that summarize aspects of Chinese culture, like porcelain and cooking. And they were printed in the 1940s in Los Angeles. And after doing some research, I found out that the family that printed them were deeply involved in building relationships between the Chinese community and the wider American public. And I just found joy in that because it's like finding like a continuous thread or a line of thought or action that's been consistent through time. And finding and being able to relate to it in terms of my background and upbringing.
Recently for me, one of my greatest joys with like book collecting and rare books and such, like when people find really cool old books, they love to show me. Like it doesn't matter the subject. They will stash them to give to me, whether they found them at a garage sale or it's something that like they found in a loved one's estate once they like passed away or something. Like they will like kind of hoard those away for me and bring them to me. uh you know and even if it's something they know I'm not going to want for my collection, they know that I'm going to know someone that will want it for their collection. Like recently, in a box of things my grandmother had bought at a yard sale, like she found some books from 1908, which were Armenian English grammar books for like teaching Armenian refugees English. Um, so like she was like, I don't know what language this is. Do you know what these are? Like, do you want them? Like they're old. Like, and I was like, I think I have an idea of what these are for. And I know someone that's like Armenian that would absolutely love to see these because it's like not a common find in Middle Tennessee to find literature that old from that time period. Like it's more common on the coast than out here. Um, so I actually passed them along to my Armenian friend, and they were very happy to see those books because they can still be used today, like whether you're learning Armenian or English. And they just had so much ephemera and like handwritten notes in them from that time period. It's not something that belonged in my personal collection, but my friend is very into collecting these types of things for their cultural heritage, and they were really honored to take it as an addition to their collection, even though they're not a rare book collector.
Not a rare book collector yet.
Yet, yes.
Yet. I think one of the things that's brought me the most joy recently has been, well, just a few days ago, I my colleagues and I were working with a supporter of the library to plan a rare book presentation. And it's just such a delight when you're working with someone who you bring out a book and say, all right, I've got something cool for you. I don't know if this is going to hit, but like let's see if it does. And you open it up and they gasp. You're like, all right, there we go. There we go. That's what I was, that's what I'm in this for. And being able to provide those moments for people. I unfortunately cannot then let them take the book home with them and add it to their personal collection. But it's really nice to be able to collect people with materials.
Yeah, that gasp is priceless. So now, if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask the speakers, feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat. Patrick and Auroura and Finch, if you want to ask each other questions about the things that you do and collect, feel free. Yeah, let's open her on up.
I just want to start by saying I'm looking at this image of the night blooming cereus, and it is absolutely gorgeous. I love how extra detailed it is compared to some of the illustrations I've seen of this flower.
It's amazing. That entire book is a real gemstone. The entire Linda Hall copy is digitized. If anyone is curious to read it, look through at the images. It's a book that the author, Thornton, was rich when he started it. Allie knows this story, but he was rich when he started it. And it's a book that my colleague jokes. They asked him what method of printing he would like used for his book, and he said yes to every single one. So it's really sumptuous. And I'm glad you enjoy. I actually had a question for Patrick, which I was wondering, as someone who's on the other side often of the curator, librarian, bookseller, book dealer relationship, I was wondering what's surprised you the most about building those relationships.
Oh, good question. I think, uh, hmm. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but just like everyone being so nice and open to sharing, like even if I reached out to a curator and offered them something and they didn't want it, they would be happy to tell me the things that they are interested in, or even say, I have a colleague that might be interested in what you have and you should email them. So I think it's just like kind of like a we're all winners mindset. Like it's mutually beneficial to everyone that placing items in the right place.
It looks like we have a question in the chat from Jillian, who says, Auroura, I'm curious about the copyright practices for tattoo art. If the book is in the public domain, is it still inappropriate/illegal to copy the tattoo as is without changing it?
So that it really depends on how the artist views it. It varies from artist to artist. Some artists are okay with being like human Xerox machines, and I do that sometimes myself, depending on what people are asking for. Like if someone wants a signature from a loved one like tattooed on them, then that's something that I have to do pretty verbatim, because autonomy comes first in the art of tattooing. But also respecting the autonomy of others when doing that, so making sure that it is not infringing on someone else's like autonomy. As far as like copyrighted stuff from corporations like Disney, it's like you can have whatever you want. We don't care about that. Like, I believe in the history of tattooing, Walt Disney was the only man to ever have sued anyone for tattooing likenesses of Mickey Mouse or other characters on people. And the the judge deemed that he could not have a monopoly in every possible category of art with his art. And so I often remind myself of that when I'm tattooing things like that. But if it's things that like are designed by independent artists, like small artists, or like I worked with a local artist recently that had designed a tattoo for one of my clients and like had permissions and everything. So if I know that, you know, something's created by someone, I do my due diligence and ask them like, hey, is it okay to like share your artwork once I've tattooed it to show like, you know, how much it changes from your concept design to the final, you know, tattoo. And you know, I don't share anything that they're not comfortable with. But as far as like older books, you know, I do like putting my own creative spin on things and taking influence for them. Like not everything I see in books could be translated so literally. Like the things that can be translated more literally are like that lithograph style that's almost etching, like kind of like what you'd see on money. Those styles, or even simpler, like woodcut, are very, very easy to translate to tattoos. So if it was an image, like I did an angel from Paradise, like a special edition of Paradise Lost recently, and it was what the client asked for specifically, I'll tattoo it like that. But if I'm like trying to present things to tattoo to other people, I won't do that. So it's kind of like there's a lot of checks and balances with that system.
It's interesting how many things in both collecting and tattooing and things like that come down to vibes, like Finch said. You know, like you can set up all of these guardrails for like, I will do this and I won't do this, and this is against the rules, and this is fully within the things that I want to do. But then there's like, well, you know, there's this exception, and you know, you can change this or keep that the same, or yeah, it's funny, the common thread there. Um, question from Abigail for Finch. Finch brought up that display potential comes into play when purchasing books for a library collection, which is something that I've recently come across as a librarian in a museum. How do you navigate this restraint, and has it kept you from adding something to the collection?
That's a really interesting question. I'd say I cannot think of any examples where that has been the only factor that's led to us deciding against making a purchase. Unfortunately, most of the things that we consider we aren't able to acquire for any number of reasons. We have a budget, I can say. So I try and navigate the restraint with, I see collecting for an institution as being forward-looking. So I evaluate items on any number of sort of possible merits. Is this something that would help complete our collection in a way that would draw researchers towards it? Is this the second edition and we have the first and third, and there's interesting changes between them? And so a researcher who would want to be able to consult all three editions together, we can make a case for the second edition as adding sort of a unique research value and making Linda Hall Library a sort of a destination for someone to come to for that. I'd say working as doing acquisitions within a collection that is part of a larger organization. Abigail, your question to me brings up that tension that was discussed a bit yesterday between sort of your personal priorities and your collection priorities and the priorities of a larger institution, and not necessarily having full control over that. So I'd say I navigate that restraint by not letting that be the only factor. Certainly, like I never want to turn down an important book just because it's not pretty enough. But very often it's not about sort of aesthetic appeal or prettiness, but it's about like, is there a spread that's captivating? It's very hard to justify dropping thousands and thousands of dollars on a book that has no images, for example. Because if I go to my colleagues in exhibitions with that and say, this is a really important book that we've acquired this year, let's put it in our annual new acquisitions showcase, they'll say, okay, but like this just isn't, people aren't going to be interested in this. I'm like, so unfortunately, people aren't going to be interested in that. I don't know. If I went to a museum, I would be floored by a book with no images, but I'm also a rare book curator, so I have to accept that I'm not your everyman.
Yeah, it's funny when you realize that you are not the target audience for a lot of museum exhibitions on rare books. I guess a question from me for all of you is what advice would you give to someone who's looking to get into collecting? Whether that is getting into working with collections or starting their own collection.
Well, kind of like what Finch was saying earlier about showing someone a book that they really like. Of course, I'm gonna like bait them with something that I know that they're really going to like about collecting. And it does not matter what you're into. There are books out there that predate anything you're currently interested in. If you like going down rabbit holes and learning and having random tidbits of knowledge, then this is absolutely something for you. My biggest piece of advice is don't stop being curious.
In my mind, I mean, it's hard to give any general advice, but it's all about the people. Finding ways to connect with like-minded people, either through professional organizations, through your friends, through people that you meet at a bookshop owners. That is really what has sustained me in the field. Like, yes, the books are important. The books are sort of the focal point, as it were. But collecting, I hesitate to say collecting is never a solitary activity. Because there are many ways that you can collect that don't involve, say, face-to-face interaction with other people. But yeah, collecting is never a solitary activity, even if that sort of human connection can take a lot of different forms. So finding ways to connect.
Yeah, and just to build off that, I think just the conversations and the relationships I've built with librarians and bookstore owners have been really valuable in learning about what's out there. And yeah, the internet is a great resource for inspiration, but also you can go talk to the older gentleman at the rare bookstore and he'll have some interesting things to say that you might not be able to find on the internet.
Any other audience questions? If not, I have plenty in the chute ready to go. I guess another one from me. For each of you, what is your collecting big fish? Like, what is that one thing that you would just love to find that would just put your collection over the top?
Not for Linda Hall, but for my personal. So I'm interested in collecting, and I've made very, very baby steps into this, collecting works of fiction or nonfiction, but mostly fiction, that posit the early modern period or sort of pre-modernity as a time of LGBTQ life and like queer and trans life in particular. So I've been working to find books that I can add to that for my personal research and sort of personal interest. It's a bit of a chicken and egg because if it's known as a sort of early modern, like a 20th century historical fiction novel that has like prominent queer characters, if it's known for that, then the price in the market reflects it. And I will say toggling back and forth between institutional pricing and personal pricing is a really throws me for a loop every time I have to say, ooh, only $500. Wait, that's $500 of my dollars, not institutional money. Okay, never mind. But a real big fish for me in that area that I don't think I'll ever see because the last copy sold in 2014 is a 1652 book. It's in Latin, but the translated title is Alcibiades the Schoolboy. That's an early modern book that posits sort of Greco-Roman antiquity as a time of, I mean, in this case, pederasty, but like homosexual life and homosexual desire. Most copies were destroyed. The copy in 2014 sold for over $10,000. But if I find one at a rare bookstore in Kansas, I'm grabbing that. Grabbing that right away.
So my big fish, I've actually already caught a few of mine. Like number one, like used to be like the Myers lexicon, which I have a set of now, and it's actually like from depression period. So that like was where I started with my big fish. And then my next one was probably like I really, really wanted a first edition copy of the Silmarillion with like the misprints and everything from J.R.R. Tolkien. And I randomly found it one day on top of a free book bin. They did not know what they were like literally tossing to the curb.
Oh my
So
God.
that was a moment of shock for me. So I'm like, okay, now I'm going to go for a first edition, first printing of every single work that Alan Watts wrote, because like if I'm doing this well on all my like other collections, may as well go for that one too. Or even the original, like I think there was like something like between 46 and 50 books in the original Peterson Field Guide series. Like I want a first printing of every single one of those too. So it's like mine are like sets of things, like whether it's by like a specific artist or something. So it's hard to pick just one book because I like volumes of books.
So I don't have a big fish in mind, but I do get really excited when I see things about cuisine in the Outer Banks, which is a border island group off the coast of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. And there's really interesting groups of people that had lived there for a long time. One that you may have heard of is the Gullah Geechee population there. So yeah, anything to do with cuisine from those islands.
Those are all really, really good big fish. I think, yeah, I would lose my freaking mind if I found a first printing of the Silmarillion in a free book pile. Like that's the dream. It you hunt through all of this stuff and you don't find something, and then all of a sudden it's just like right there. Like, what are the odds? Um,
Can I ask a
go
question?
ahead. Yeah.
Okay. This is for Finch and Patrick. Aside from the things that we've talked about, what was your most unexpected experience with getting into the rare book and rare book collecting world? Like, what took you most by surprise?
One that really took me by surprise, I'm sure is a common experience, but I had gone to undergraduate and graduate school with I've gone into the reading room, I've just washed my hands, clean, dry hands, no pens, put your bags away, the sort of US security. And then I went to my first book fair. and they were like, "Hi, we got red and white wine over there. If you want, there's also some sparkling water. You can take that. Got cookies, fruit, and the books are right here." That was a real culture shock for me. I was like, I can have so which room do I go to enjoy the refreshments before and then where can I wash my hands? Like, no, it's fine. You can just, here, look, that bookseller's using the Gutenberg as a coaster. Like, so that was certainly a culture shock. That's the first one that comes to mind.
One thing that comes to mind in that I saw in also book fairs is just the amount of knowledge that and research that some booksellers put into the objects that they find. Sometimes they do like even more research than I would expect the researchers at the graduate libraries to actually do. So I guess just the fact that they are so interested in these very niche topics and are willing to spend a lot of unpaid time, I presume, going really deep into an object and its history was surprising to me and exciting.
I love both of those. They're definitely like two different unique experiences in the rare book world that I've definitely not encountered yet. So thank you for sharing.
I think getting back to the question that I asked Finch about being in the Midwest and Auroura, I know that you've dealt with this sort of thing too. But how how would you like to be, I guess, supported more or better or differently by existing establishments like the Bibliographical Society or like the ABAA or anything like that? Because I know folks from those organizations are always looking for more ways to get to know people who are coming up in the field and also help where they can, but it's not always a one-to-one effort to success there.
Yeah, so like I was actually looking at the ABA's website recently and I was looking and there's like I believe there's like maybe one bookseller in my area and like he doesn't have like a storefront here or anything like that, and I'm like I've never met this guy. All of like my rare book people that I've met around here, I've met them in passing because they will catch me talking about books or art or something and they're like, do you like books, so it's very like I meet people almost speakeasy style because I'm essentially in the middle of nowhere. But I would really love to see maybe some encouragement and training for like local small bookstores to like, even if it's not their primary focus of like rare books, I would like to see more of them like receiving like training and having the opportunity to share rare books with the community a lot more. So whether it's like having special trainings for them to encourage them to start carrying rare books, or just anything to make rare books more accessible on a small local scale, I think would be very helpful. Just because, like I got into rare books from finding things you wouldn't believe in, boxes at garage sales in the middle of Appalachia until I came to Nashville and found used bookstores, which honestly, they don't know what they have most of the time.
I feel pretty fortunate I think that the BSA's efforts well, for one, having a emerging membership tier has made it really useful. I think the BSA is perhaps the only organization that I would remain a member of if I did not have my institution paying membership dues for me. Sorry to ALA. probably shouldn't say that on a recording, but well. I think an excellent way to support people, across the United States and across the world is virtual offerings and maintaining a virtual option. If you're giving a lecture, have a Zoom option. It's always disheartening when I get a notification for a lecture. I'm really excited. I go to register and I see that it's only in person. That's frustrating. I'd say that opportunities, sort of, if organizations could find ways to foster collaborations between institutions and between people, and or just provide space for people to meet each other, I could see a lot of utility for that, because it's easy to sort of keep your collaborations to a limited geographic area. But there are a lot of people, who are not in New York. I'd also say considering where you hold your conferences. I will hopefully be attending RBMS this year, but I've seen expressed places that, oh, it's great that it's in New Haven because New Haven's so easy to get to. I'm like, New Haven is easy to get to if you're on the Northeast Regional Amtrak line. I have to figure out how to get to New York City. I need to figure out how to fly to New Haven from Kansas City, which is going to be a whole mess. So like just considering us when you choose where you're going to have your conferences. I'll still go, but I don't simply want to grind an axe. But yeah, virtual offerings and reaching out to people and sort of encouraging collaboration beyond sort of traditional routes that collaboration has occurred through, I see as being possible roles for organizations moving forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of those answers. I think accessibility and outreach are really important. For example, I live not in New York or LA, but there are multiple state universities around here, and I had no idea that they had special collections and how interesting their special collections were until recently. So I know there's not much funding for that, but local programming and outreach, I think, could be really important, as well as just being able to access the libraries, whether it's through travel research grants or public transit, just having those options available. Yeah.
Awesome answers from all of you. Rebecca Johnson says there was a great RBMS in Chapel Hill several years ago with chances to visit multiple collections. Yeah, that's always a fun part of RBMS is like, yeah, what are the field trips? I say that as someone who has never been to an in-person RBMS, which is a little embarrassing to admit, but I've been to a couple digital ones. So that does speak to the utility of the sort of diversity of offerings of this sort of thing. And I think unless there are any other audience questions, this is a really great note to end on. So thank you again to Finch and Patrick and Auroura for joining us today. This recording will be posted on the Bibliographical Society YouTube. So you will get an email notification about that when it is live.